generator is really a device that runs and makes electricity. And what you have to do is have some kind of a power unit to be able to drive something to make the generator work, to get the electricity. And there's lots of forms of electricity. There's AC, there's DC. So,
what are they used for?
well, again, they're used for about the same thing. There's DC generators, and DC generators are like in your car. They take and they charge up your battery in your car. And that was years ago more than today. Now, today in a car, they're called an alternator, which is just a little bit different than what a generator is. But most generators used today are to make electricity.
What's an AC generator?
Well, an AC generator is, and of course we're getting into the different kinds of them, but an AC generator is what powers houses, electricity, and manufacturing places, and businesses and all that kind of stuff. But that's what makes electricity.
I'll answer the last question, but what do they power?
Well, what they power is depending on what use you need it in. And the first use is you have to take, and we're going to start pretty much at the beginning of taking, and the biggest generators are ones that are at like rivers. And that's powered by the river. And what they do is the water goes in little tubes, and it's like a dam. And it backs the water up, and they let this water go on through each one of these dams, and depending on how many they open up these little dinky chutes is how much power they have to have. And what this does, it turns a turbine inside of it, which is just a little wheel. And when you turn this turbine, it takes and it cranks over this, like this armature. And it sits there and goes around, and this armature makes the electricity that you have to have.
What's an armature?
Well, an armature is like, it's a little, you know, of course this, we're talking huge. I mean, we're talking, I've never seen one yet, but you could probably take and walk in the cavity of where this is. That's how big it is. But it's kind of like inside of a drill. There's this little round thing. I'll show you one in a little bit. But anyway, it turns this. And when it turns this, that's what makes electricity. And like getting back into it again of how many holes they open up for the water to go through, that makes more and more power to power this generator. Now getting on to it is you have to take and generate this, and that is what is supplied to like Midwest Power, IPS, that Wayne works for. Well, then they can take this, and they take this electricity, and they shoot it wherever they have to have it, depending on if it's at Carroll, Sioux City, you know. But these are big lines that come into these places, and then they shoot off for little lines. And those is what makes our electricity. So the major generator you're talking about is generators like this, that you're going to have to look up and talk more for the river part of it.
Well, what you're telling me before is that there's different kinds of generators that power different things, like farmer's yard or something like that.
Yes, and that's what we're going to be getting into next. Is after that, there's different sizes of generators. Now that's the big one we was talking about. Here we go down to The next one, now it's like roll screen out here. They have one that'll run the whole plant. And what that is run by is an engine. And this engine is like a 10-cylinder engine. And now that's bigger than any car has got, or truck, or anything. And that runs their whole place. And this has to be big enough to run. They have 3 30-horsepower motors, which takes a lot of amps, all the dust collectors and all that kind of stuff. But it's probably 20 foot by 15 foot. So, which is a pretty big generator. And the next style is, and of course, like I said, it's run by a gasoline engine. Now the next step down is one that is run on a farm. And then there's difference there too. And some farms do the same thing. They have the generators that are run by an automotive engine, like you have in your car. So when you start up this car engine, it starts up this generator, and they're all the same principle. Is it turns an armature in there, and when it turns the armature it takes and makes electricity. And there's lots of ways of different things that makes this. You can take and have circuit boards that makes this stuff go, and that circuit board that I showed you, okay, that's one of them. And then they have just the armature, which I'll show you, that's got a commutator on there. And each one of these commutator on some has got like 4 different commutators on it. And 3 of them are to make electricity, really. And the other one you have to have an exciter. And it excites it to make it go. What exciting means is you have to take and give it a little bit of electricity before it's going to put out electricity. And that's what an exciter is. So you don't really have to put that involved. Yeah. But anyway, that's what I'm talking about. But see, now then we're going with next is a tractor one. And what this is, it's a generator that's probably 2 foot by 4 foot, and it's just round, and then there's usually a gearbox on it. And you hook this up to your tractor, and the tractor runs this. And when you get down to it, there's different sizes of those too. There's 40 kW is really the biggest one, and that's 40 kilowatts that makes. And that will pretty much run most of a complete farm plus stuff. Let's say someone has got hog units and all that kind of stuff, they have to have more energy for than just a regular farm. And a 40 like I said, it'll run everything. Now if you get down to a 30 you got to start limiting a few things. You can't have this full farm hookup on there, 30 kilowatts. Now you get down to a 20 kilowatt, and that will run just pretty much a house. And that's it. It's not going to run any more than a house for 40 kW. And you get down to, which we have a 4,000 watt. Not a 40,000 watt, a 4,000. And a 4,000 watt will...
Well, when you're talking about 40 watt, that's a 40,000 watt.
40,000, yes.
4 watt,
And
40 watt.
And we're a 4,000 kilowatt.
So that'd be a 4 watt.
4 kilowatt.
4 kilowatt, right.
And that will run just your furnace and a refrigerator. And that's about it. It won't run any more than that.
So we have a generator in the house?
We have, it's over at Terry's. It's in the shed. But it's not in the house. It's one of those we take to all the neighborhood. The whole neighborhood owns it.
So if the neighborhood loses something, then we use it?
Well, if we lose electricity, then we will take the generator and we'll move it to houses, and we'll do whatever we have to do.
Alright.
What I would do is I would do the furnace and get the house warm first of all, and then I would do refrigerators, get refrigerators going, and then I might go into doing a couple water beds. And that's about all it's going to handle, just a couple at a time. It's not going to do the whole thing. So, and what that is that's a lot smaller. That's like a lawnmower engine. So a 4,000 watt generator is lawnmower size. So it's only the size that a lawnmower would have in there.
Okay, the next one was, what do the power, or I mean, how do they work? But you already answered that question, so we'll go to, okay.
Well, how do they work is you start off, of course, with, depending on what type it is, and you can go into the different types, but, it's either powered by, it has to be powered by something. It's either powered by a lawnmower engine, it's either powered by a tractor, it's powered by your car, or it's powered by, like, water. And they have nuclear now. Nuclear power is another type of a generator. So you want to put those in there. There's stuff like nuclear, water, gasoline are the types that they really have for generators.
Do we use the generators, or do we have to use like a pamphlet to use the generators, or do we just hook it up to electricity, or how do we use them?
Well, you pretty much, if you have your electricity on, that's being powered by a generator somewhere. You don't know where it is. They can switch it from here to here. If this water level is low, they'll take it on to another one. Then they have booster plants, like out here by Fairview, that place that's all enclosed, that's in that wire out there, and another one south of town out here. And those are substations, and they kind of pump it up a little bit too, and they do that through capacitors and all that kind of stuff to make the electricity a little stronger. But you're using a generator whenever you turn on a light. That's a generator somewhere being used, and they store that stuff up. And when you're talking for you to use it, you either going to have to start up your lawnmower, just like the lawnmower, and plug it on in to whatever you have to have, and then you have to do it. But you have to be really careful when you do this stuff, is if you have to be able to turn off your electricity somewhere to be able to do this. And if you don't, you're going to be backfeeding it. And if some guy is working on that power out there and he thinks everything's off and you got your generator on, you could kill him. And that's one of the big things that linemen are always afraid of is that this farmer over here has got all this juice going to his place and he doesn't have it disconnected. And that's getting into another device, and it's just like an outlet, but it's called a pole top disconnect. And they have to, when a farmer takes and puts his generator on to power his farm, he has to throw this great big switch that's on the pole, and that'll disconnect this so that he is no longer hooked up to the power company, like IPS, REC, or wherever they're at. And if he doesn't do this, he's putting electricity into these wires here that's going somewhere else. So you got to be really careful, and they really frown on you if you don't have this pole top disconnect and you're using your generator.
Are they easy to use? Like, do you have to keep up with them, or you just turn them on and they're fine?
Well, there's not really a lot of maintenance to it. What you really have to do is most people just have the tractor backed up to it, and then what they do is you just put your tractor onto it, which is it's called the RPM of is 540 RPMs on a tractor one, and you set that on there, and there's just a little gauge there, and you just take your throttle like driving a car. You push your throttle on down to where.
Yep.
sizes of them, you know, you do different kinds.
Like, is there like a whole bunch of different kinds, or just?
Well, there's all manufacturers, and that depends on what you want. If you want small generators, big generators, and when it comes up to like water-powered generators, I really don't know. Same with nuclear powered, you know. And you're going to have to kind of do that yourself and go through the books and find nuclear-powered ones and water-powered ones. And I'm sure that Encyclopedia can tell you some of that stuff of what's going on with those. But when they're talking smaller ones, you have stuff like Generac sells generator. Winco is another big one. Pinco is another one. Coleman is another one that sells a smaller one. There's Niagara that sells generators. So that's just.
Are these just the bigger corporations? Does that mean there's a whole bunch of smaller corporations?
Well, I guess so. Those are the main ones that I get into to service and clicks. There's just a few names of them that does do stuff like that. I'm sure there's lots more out there. Maybe this is the ones that does it around here. I know like Coleman is manufactured in Nebraska, and like Generac, they're up in like Wisconsin. So there's something that's just done around here that we go. But I'm sure you go down the south, there's other names, stuff that I've never heard of before. You know, some of them are out of business. Pinco is one that's hard to get parts for anymore. They're kind of out of business, but Niagara is another one that's, and then there's some that's been bought out. And Niagara is one that used to be made a lot, and was bought out by somebody else. So what I have to do is I have to go into it and revise this generator to make it work. I have to take parts from one, rewire it, put parts like this one here into that to make it work. So.
Okay, if there's an amateur and a drill, and then there's an amateur and a generator, does that mean a generator and a drill are the same or similar?
It's the same principle behind the two to make them work. The one is it feeds electricity out, and the other one needs electricity to make it work. So when you're starting off as with a drill, it takes that electricity from the generator to be able to make that drill work. And it's the same principle about armature and north and south poles to be able to make that stuff of it work. But in a generator, it's just the opposite of, in a drill, that electricity powers that to make something else so it can drill. Well, it's just the opposite in a generator. A generator has to have something else to power it to make electricity. You understand that? It's just the opposite. One has to have electricity to make it work to power something else, but a generator needs something to power it to make the electricity. And this is a big point here is most generators come out to be DC. And there has to be something to change it over to make it AC. Whether it's a circuit board with all the stuff on there, resistors, and stuff like that, capacitors, or if it's a rectifier. And a rectifier takes and changes AC to DC. You can go either one direction or the other. And I'll show you one of those is demonstrated too.
Well, if you have something else to add, because I don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Shop now. Show you what we got.